Good morning, everybody. It is good to see everyone's here today. We have a lot of folks that are sick. And so we're going to just take a minute. We're going to open up with a word of prayer, and then we're going to dive back into Obadiah. Father, thank you so very much for today and this good chance to get together. Lord, I do lift up the folks that are ill. In some cases, it's part of the family was sick earlier in the week, and now the rest of them is sick now. Others of us are getting over things, or suddenly in the last 24 hours or so been hit with something. So, God, I ask that you would lay your hands upon our congregation. God, I pray that you would bless us. I pray that we would have good health, and that as we gear up into the Christmas season and especially start getting together more frequently with family and friends, Lord, that you would keep the sickness from us and we would neither catch it nor spread it. We bless you. We look forward to spending time in your word. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so 2 weeks ago, I think we began in Obadiah 2 weeks ago. Obadiah is the shortest of the Old Testament. I think it's the shortest book in the Bible, and also the shortest of the Old Testament prophets. It is only, I think it's 21 verses long, and is solely concerned with basically one vision or one prophecy. So we've been working our way through. If you have your paper with you, we are at the top of the second page. Because it's been 2 weeks, I think it's good to just remind us that Obadiah is a prophet who prophesies around the time of the collapse, or probably just after the destruction of Jerusalem. And as refugees fled from Jerusalem, their neighbors, who are also I don't know how to call it, kind of like culturally or genetically related to them, the Edomites. Edom was one of the two names that was given to the older brother of Jacob. Jacob was renamed by God into Israel. So when you think of the patriarchs, Jacob is like the patriarch of Israel, and his older brother Esau, or Edom, is the patriarch of this nation of Edom. And they always had a rocky relationship. They had a rocky relationship as brothers, actual physical brothers, and then as nations next to one another, they had a rocky relationship as nations as well. And including times of oppression from Edom, and also times when Israel was effectively in charge of the nation of Edom. And I hope that you've taken some time, maybe you forgot, but I want to encourage you, go online and type in images of Edom, and you will see this mountainous country that these folks lived in, and how they utilized like the faces of mountains and carved their like sanctuaries or buildings like right into the faces of the mountains. Really, really cool to check that out, especially as things within the book of Obadiah talk about how you feel safe in your place, your high places in the mountains and things like that, but the Lord is going to come for you. So we got through Obadiah 15, which talked about the day of the Lord, and that came up, I think, as a contrast to the previous 4 or 5 verses, where Obadiah, or God through Obadiah, is charging Edom with wrongdoing based upon how they treated Israel on the day of their, and it says, it was started off with the day you stood aloof, and then it talked about the day of his, speaking of Jacob or Israel, the nation of Judah, the day of his misfortune, the day of their ruin, the day of distress, the day of their calamity, the day of his calamity, the day of his calamity, the day of distress. And then it says, for the day of the Lord is coming. And it really struck me as a sharp contrast that Edom took advantage of their brother when they were in on the day of their distress, the day of destruction, the day of calamity. But now the day of the Lord is at hand, and it's going to be a day of reckoning. So that's what we covered up through last week. Let's look at verses 16 through 18. And we're going to look and ask ourselves, what do we see when we compare? We're going to read 16 through 18 and then see what do we see when we compare verse 17 back with verse 8. 16. For you have drunk on my holy mountain, as all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow, and shall be as though they had never been. But in Mount Zion there shall be those who escape, and it shall be holy. And the house of Jacob shall possess their own possessions. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. They shall burn them and consume them, and there shall be no survivor for the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. So, what is God's promise in verses 16 through 18? And maybe there's something else we should pick up before we do that. Something I probably should have commented on and then didn't, or asked a question about. So, just look at verse 16 for a second. What is verse 16 saying? Right. They drank or partied or whatever probably at the temple at Jerusalem as a result of the fall of the city of Jerusalem, right? You did it and all the nations did it. How do I phrase this? I want to kind of lead it out of you. So he says that all you shall drink, so all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow, and shall be as though they had never been. What is that talking about? Yeah, verse 16. So all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow, and shall be as though they had never been. All right. Before we go resorting to notes, right? I think it's good. So I believe in I like commentaries. I use commentaries. I use notes. But so my dad taught this. My biological dad taught this thing. He spent a short time as a teacher, and he gave all of his tests open book. Junior high, open book. Everything was open book. And what was the reason it was open book? You guys know? Because he said, when someday you go to work, if you don't know the answer, all you need to know is to know where to go find it. Right? And so you could still fail the test in my dad's class because you decided not to study and not know the information. So you're like, oh, I'll just go look for it while I'm taking the test because Mr. Wright always gives open book tests. But you could spend so much time looking for stuff that you couldn't get the whole test done. In part, I agree with my dad's philosophy. In part, I agree with it because he's right. If you don't know the answer to something, you have the freedom to go look at it. Most of us are carrying in our pockets right now access to all human knowledge, or nearly all, right? How many of you remember phone numbers anymore? I remember phone numbers from my childhood. I have to struggle. I don't know Sandy's work phone number. If I had to call her at the school, I'm going to have to pull that up on my cell phone and intentionally dial it. There are a couple of phone numbers I know from folks in our church because when I first came here, I didn't have a cell phone and I memorized most of the phone numbers of the people in the church. But some of those people have passed away. Some of those people have moved elsewhere. Some new folks have come in, and I can't remember their phone numbers anymore. Right? I still like I remember Carrie's and Lisa's because I've been calling their number for 23 years. You know, but most folks I don't remember because they'd switch over to cell phones and that became predominant or whatever. You know, um, so for the most part, I agree with my dad's philosophy, but I do think it's important to actually know things, to have that information in your head so that when you're reading something, you don't get stuck without information. And what often happens to us is we read past stuff because we don't have the information. So God says God's charge against Esau or Edom and the nations is you went into my holy place and you drank the sacred wine. I have news for you. So you like that phrase, you like apples? How you like them apples? So you like my wine? Well, wine, when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he is praying, he says, Father, take this cup from me. Figuratively, what is it? Figuratively, it's a cup of wine. Um, when you book of Revelation, what gets poured out? Cups of God's wrath, right? There's the bowls and the cups. Cups of God's wrath. What's it a cup of? Yeah, but it's a cup of wine, right? It's a cup of wine. So to make wine, you need to crush grapes, right? And what color is it? It's red. It's most likely red wine, right? So when you crush grapes in the grape crushing thing, what does it look like? It looks like a lot of blood. Fantastic image for wrath. Most of the time, when you read in the Bible about God pouring out a cup of wine, it's not because he's like, oh, I've had too much to drink, so I'm going to dump this because I've already sipped from it and I might have a cold and no one else should drink from it. it's it is God pouring out his wrath. So this is very much therefore in parallel to the previous 5 verses, right? Where or 5, 6 verses where God said, so you took advantage of my people on the day of their calamity. Now's coming the day of the Lord. So you wanted to drink my wine in my holy place? Well, how are you gonna like my wine? Now, you want my wine? Let me show you my wine. Right? It's like the Incredible Hulk, Bruce Banner being like, don't make me angry. You won't like me when I'm angry. Right? It's like people were pushing on God, and God's going, hey, 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 don't push me, because I'll push back. And then he says, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Janice. Yeah. So Yes, I use the book of Revelation. Janice reminds us that it's the cup of wrath is an Old Testament image. Here we are in the Old Testament. If you don't know your Old Testament, the book of Revelation is going to be a mystery to you. If you know your Old Testament, the book of Revelation is still going to be a mystery to you. But at least you'll have some idea, right? At least you'll be like, oh, I've seen that before. I've seen that image. I get it. Oh, you're like Daniel. Oh, Ezekiel. Oh, Joel. You're seeing that there. But you're still, in my opinion, and there are those that have a discernment I don't have. Book of Revelation, broadly, God will get fed up. God will have the victory. And if you are his child, you will be shielded from his wrath and then live with him forever in eternity. That's broadly it. The rest of it, I don't dates, times, what the whole thing with locusts with human faces and like armor, I don't know. I don't get that. But I trust God that he knows what he means. Well, God has already won. Number one, God has already won because the price has been paid by Jesus on the cross. And number two, if God says something will happen, it's as good as done. It's as good as done. The victory has already been achieved. It's just a matter of working out the details. And we're in the middle of the details right now. Absolutely, Carlton. Thank you. So what we've got here is basically, so you wanted to drink from my wine, all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow. Just like forced down their throat. And shall be as though they had never been. How do we know about the nation of Edom? What we find in the Bible and what they dust off and dig up in the nation where Edom once was. How do we know about the Philistines? What we find in the Bible and what they dust off and dig up. Babylon, Assyria. Very, very few of the nations that are mentioned in Scripture still exist today. Isn't that something? Yet, interestingly, even without a place to call a homeland, the Jews continued as a people for 1800 something years until they were given, moved back to, the nation of Israel was kind of mapped back out by the UN in 1948. How crazy is that? They shall be as though they had never been. So I want to take a little peek between verses 17 and verse 8 for just a second. So check out verse 8. It says, will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy the wise men out of Edom and understanding out of Mount Esau? Right? Verse 17, but in Mount Zion there shall be those who escape, and it shall be holy, and the house of Jacob shall possess their own possessions. What do you see? Do you see an interesting parallel there? Or it's a what they call a contrasting parallel? What happens in Mount Edom or Mount Esau? Destruction, God's wrath, right? And it's cool. I mean, I don't think I should maybe cool, but look at, I will destroy the wise men out of Edom and understanding out of Mount Esau. And so, right, that mount, one of the cool things about Obadiah is it's so small, it's easy to find the parallels, right? When you're reading a book like Isaiah that's 50-something chapters long, you might have something said in chapter 2 that gets repeated in chapter 49. Well, right? You miss the parallel until you've read the book over and over and over again. But in a teensy tiny little book like Obadiah, it's easy to start seeing stuff. Um, he's so you have the mount and the mount, like the mount that you would recognize, that you would think of when you think of the nation of Edom. This right, this Mount Esau, and then when you think of Judah, it's Mount Zion. In Mount Esau, on Mount Esau, the wise men, the smartest of the bunch, are going to be wiped out. If the smartest of the bunch are going to be wiped out, probably doesn't pose too well, right? Look too good for the people that aren't so bright. But in Mount Zion, there shall be those who shall escape, and it shall be holy. In Mount Edom, there's going to be destruction. On Mount Zion, the people of Jacob shall possess their own possessions. They'll have their stuff back. So it's I thought it was an interesting little parallel to check out. And when we look at verse 18, how are God's people described as opposed to the people of Esau? Yeah. Yeah. So Judah and Joseph, or yeah, I'm sorry, it says Jacob. Jacob. So Jacob is all Israel. That would include the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And then God even points out to say Joseph. So Joseph is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. He's the one who was sold by his brothers to become a slave down in Egypt because he was insufferable to live with. He was the youngest. He was the youngest of Jacob's 11 sons at that point, and Jacob had designated him as firstborn. Well, he wasn't. Is he the youngest? I think he's the youngest. And he's designated as firstborn because he's the firstborn child of Jacob's preferred wife. Right? You'll remember that Jacob wanted to marry Rachel, but his father-in-law tricked him, and he had to marry Leah first. And Leah is described as a woman with weak eyes, which, in a time before there were glasses, she was probably squinty. I've heard folks say she's probably squinty. Leah, it's evident as you read Genesis, Leah loved Jacob. She loved him. And the morning he woke up after their wedding night, probably too drunk to realize he was with the wrong woman until morning, he stomps off out of bed to go figure out what happened, why he didn't have the right one. And then his father-in-law, such a loving man, says, it's not our custom for the younger child to be married before the older ones. It's like you had to marry this one first, right? Jerk. And he says, let your wedding week be over with, right? Let's get you out to your honeymoon. When you get back, you can marry my other daughter. And I just, work off another 7 years for her. Jerk. Bunch of jerks. So then they get into a uterus battle, right? Because Leah's having babies and Rachel's not. So Rachel says, I know. I'm going to give my husband my handmaid so that she can have children for me. Right? And Jacob, ever the gentleman, when suggested to him by his second wife, who's the one he wanted to marry anyway, says, how about you start having sex with my beautiful young handmaid over here so that I can have children through her? He says, all right. And then Leah saying, wait a second, now she has 2 uteruses working for her. That's not fair. He says, honey, how about you take my handmaid as your other concubine so that you can have children, she can have children for me? And Jacob, ever the gentleman, says, okay. And so he has 2 wives and 2 concubines, and from them he ends up having 11 children. And at first. And then he decides to love one child, the youngest, more than he loves all the rest of them. And he treats him as the firstborn. It says he gets this, our translations are kind of funky about this cloak or coat that Joseph is given. One of my seminary professors, Gordon Hugenberger, said it's probably best not understood as a coat of many colors, although that's possible, but as a coat with long sleeves. With the idea being that if you have a coat with long sleeves, you don't do manual labor. You're the management. You take notes. You fill out paperwork. You count stuff like coins, right? Like that's what you do. And so, and then Jacob is sending his youngest son, who's like 16, 17 years old, out to check on his brothers and tell them what to do. And meanwhile, Joseph starts having these dreams of absolute dominance over his whole family. And he's so insufferable, he tells them about it. Like, can you imagine? Hey, brothers, I had a dream last night where I dominated all of you, and you guys are all just bowing down to me. Oh, you little jerk. Right? Can you imagine being a 25, 30-year-old man being told by your youngest brother, some 16-year-old upstart, that he's going to run your life? 25-year-old man can beat the tar out of him, and he's got 10 other guys to hold him, right? He's had it. And then he comes back around to his dad. Dad, I had this dream that you and mom were bowing down to me as well as all my brothers. So the brothers get sick of him. He comes out to check on him. They throw him in an old cistern, and they're going to kill him. But Reuben, who's already messed up with his dad, says, no, don't kill him. He's thinking, we'll keep him. Dad will think he's lost. I'll find him, and then I'll be back in Dad's good graces. And he's in Dad's bad graces because he had intercourse with one of the concubines. Good family. Judah says, we're not going to kill him. We'll sell him. And he gets sold off, and he goes down to Egypt. And that in Joseph is the instrument that God uses to preserve the nation of Israel as they grow for something like 20 years. And Joseph rises to power in Egypt, and a famine hits the land, that Joseph is able to shelter his family down in Egypt. And that's where they grow and become a nation and ultimately fall into slavery in the nation of Egypt. So when Joseph gets mentioned, Joseph, he has a son named Ephraim. And Ephraim's the youngest son. He gets blessed as the firstborn. It's a recurring theme. And he becomes the dominant tribe in the northern kingdom. So that often in the prophetic literature, the nation of Israel, the northern kingdom, is called Ephraim. So when it says Joseph here, it's important to point out that what God is saying is not only will there be a remnant from Judah that will survive, but even from the nation of Israel that was wiped out almost 140 years before, there will be a remnant from them that will survive, and that will be on Mount Zion and will take possession of their land, of their property. It's a pretty great promise, because that northern kingdom had just been absolutely obstinate and had wandered away from God so seriously. And I think it's amazing to look at this passage here that talks about this Jacob as being like a fire and Joseph like a flame, and Esau stubble. You don't even know what it was when you look at it. Burnt up. There shall be no survivor for the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. Let's look at verses 19 through 21. This is the end of the book. Those of the Negev shall possess Mount Esau. The Negev is the southern part of Israel that basically goes down to Egypt. And those of the Shephelah shall possess the land of the Philistines. The Shephelah is a kind of like the plains, sort of. It's more of a flat area that goes between the mountains and the sea. And they shall possess the land of Ephraim and the land of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead. The exiles of the host of the people of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites as far as Zarephath, and the exiles of Jerusalem, who are in Sepharad, shall possess the cities of the Negev. Saviors shall go up to Mount Zion to rule Mount Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. So, what does God describe for his people? Sorry? What's going to happen, which is, right, they're going to possess the land. This is God returning to his promise to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. He describes the Holy Land. He just does it in terms, of course, that we don't understand because we don't use these terms. We don't say Negev. We don't say Shephelah, right? We don't always know the places, the towns, and etc. But what he's doing is he's describing the territory as he described it to Abraham, Isaac, to Jacob, as they had it sort of under like King David and King Solomon. You're going to have it back. It's going to be yours. To the point that they're gonna possess the lands of their enemies, right? So you get Esau mentioned, you get the Philistines mentioned, you know, and you get some of these place names mentioned that are you get Canaanites mentioned, that those that were there that had impeded you will be gone because of the day of the Lord, right? We're going to go right back to verse 15 about that. And this is really cool. Saviors shall go up to Mount Zion to rule Mount Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. So I'm going to go out on a limb. Ready? I'm not sure if it is. If you want to show grandeur or definitiveness in Hebrew, how do you do it? Does anybody remember? Majesty. If you want to show weight. Yeah, if you want to show weight. So Hebrew only has one case. They don't have upper and lower case. How do we show majesty, grandeur, definitiveness? We use a capital letter, right? So that's how we distinguish between God, the God Yahweh, right, that we worship, and if you were to write God with a lowercase g, you know, you might just be lazy or texting and lazy, right? But it's usually you're speaking about a false God, right? A God among many. I think it's possible to read this text and see Jesus in this text. Deliverers? Yeah. So deliverer, savior, effectively the same thing. I think it's possible that this is a plural of majesty, so that it is not intended to be understood as saviors, but as the Savior. Not as deliverers, but as the deliverer. Shall go up onto Mount Zion, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. It's a bit of a limb. Grammatically, it works. Theologically, it works. Right. So then you have to ask the question, what is meant by the day of the Lord, right? And this is where you come into the uh, when we talk about fulfillment of biblical prophecy, you can have uppercase F fulfillment and lowercase f fulfillment, right? So that when Edom eventually got wiped out, I don't know when that is, but nobody talks about them anymore. The last real record that I know of that we have of people of Edomite descent is King Herod. King Herod was what was called an Idumean. It's the same thing. They just changed up one of the vowels, and he and the Herods had dominion over the people of Israel during the time of the first century, but they got wiped out. They're gone. And now we don't talk about the nation of Edom at all. I don't know when the last time was anybody talked about the nation of Edom, right? So you could say that when Edom was wiped out, that's what God's talking about, the day of the Lord. But I would probably call that a lowercase f fulfillment, um, as opposed to an ultimate day of the Lord, right? Which would be the capital F fulfillment, which could be this could be a reference to end times when Christ finally rules. This could well be a reference to Jesus' crucifixion, if I'm right about the grammar. Um, it's hard to say, right? It could simply be straight up reference to the day when Israel returned from captivity, or Judah returned from captivity. It could be a reference to the day when the Herods get wiped out during, right around the time of the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. It could be a reference to the end times, right? It could be any of those things, and it can be all of them, right? With lowercase f fulfillment, that God fulfills it, but not in its fullest sense, its ultimate sense. So it's tricky. And does God show up on his own, or does he show up with the angels? Doesn't matter. Right? If God sends in the hosts of his angel armies to do his work, it is as if God did it. Yeah. It could be, right? It could be. Yeah, it's a pro- interpreting prophecy is a slightly tricky thing. Um, let's take a little peek. A couple of little questions to think about here. How have God's people been consistently named in Obadiah? As Jacob. It's not to say you don't see that in other places, but it's so consistent in the book of Obadiah. Why? And what does it tell you about Obadiah? Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's comparing the descendants of Jacob with the descendants of Esau. I had this experience when I was in sixth grade. I'd been in my Boy Scout troop for only a short amount of time. I was a bullied kid growing up. Having been an abused kid, there's really only one of two directions that an abused kid goes in. Either an abused kid becomes a bully himself and bullies those that are smaller than he is, or that sense of being a victim sort of guides him into school, right, and among other kids as well. And then all the other kids who are jerks, they pick up on that, and so they reinforce it, right? And so I was a bullied kid, and I remember this one event. I remember it so distinctly. I was getting chased by a bunch of kids through the schoolyard. They wanted to beat me up, and the teachers back, it was the 1980s, right? So the teachers are all standing in a circle, smoking cigarettes and chatting during recess. And uh, and these kids were chasing me. There was nowhere for me to go, and I saw one of the boys from my Boy Scout troop. His name was Chris. He was an 8th grader, and I ran up to him, and I said, "Chris, can I stand with you till the end of recess? There are a bunch of kids that are chasing me, and they want to beat me up." And he pushed me away from him. He said, "Get away." And I subsequently got pounded on within about 5 or 6 feet of him. Like, I saw him watch me get beaten up. He was in my Boy Scout troop. A scout is loyal, thrifty, trustworthy, brave. That's what we said. We want to be careful when we look at the prophets, to not make the words that they use their own words, because they're God's words. But God works uniquely through these prophets. And I think that Obadiah has many of the same feelings that God has, that I had that day. You might have barely known me. Our troop was pretty big. But dude, man, I'm in your Boy Scout troop. Couldn't you have stood by me? Right? Instead of pushed me aside and watched. And if you stand by and watch, that's approval. As I got beaten up by, probably 4, 5, 6, I don't know how many kids, it was a lot. Obadiah is also looking at Esau in just like incredulity. How could you do this? Sure, you guys don't get along. Well, let me tell you, my brother Keith and I, we didn't get along. And I would pound on him relentlessly, right? As kids, there were times he had a black eye, he had a bloody nose, I had a black eye, I had a bloody nose, and we did it to each other. But if Keith and I were in a fight in our front yard and someone else joined in, you know what was going to happen? 2 of us were going to turn on that idiot and we were going to rip him to shreds. Right? Like, I can do that to my brother, but no one else can. And certainly that was wrong, right? Esau should have been like that. Should have been like that. It would have been bad enough, but it would have been better than standing by with an eye of approval than to swoop in and pillage and grab up refugees and sell them to the Babylonians. So I think Obadiah also has that just incredulity. Like, what are you doing? Yeah, we don't get along, but we're brothers. How could you do this? What does it tell you about God's expectations of us? Protect one another. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, we like to be right. Yep. Yep. Yeah, we like to be right. We like to point at other people's sin and not see our own. Talk a little bit about that in the sermon today. Um, Not 1885, something like that. Our church burned down. And it was our own fault. There'd been a dinner or something. It used to be upstairs was the kitchen. There was no basement. And someone had left a rag on a stove and set fire, burned the building down. Methodist Church, the Congregational Church, they said, come worship in our sanctuary. They could have sat and said, your people are welcome to come to our services, right? And basically wiped out First Baptist Church from memory. But instead, they said, come worship in our sanctuaries. Use them. To my knowledge, free of charge. Now, granted that in the 1880s, there was no electricity. It was probably all heated, with coal or, or whatever, right? It was a different time. But pretty cool. Really pretty cool. Loving. When it comes down to it, there are so many churches in town. There are only so many people. There are only so many people within the group of so many people that are in the town that are going to attend church. The more churches you have, the fewer people are in your church, right? From a certain point of view. And they could have looked and said, aha, now we can suck up another 100 people. But they didn't. They opened their arms. And they were generous. I think we should open our arms and be generous with one another when one another is in times of trouble, regardless of what those times of trouble are. For Judah, it was self-imposed. They'd done it to themselves by being faithless to God. Sometimes, I think most of the time, most of our problems are self-generated. We know what is right and we don't do it. We like shortcuts. We like the easy way out. And we make trouble for ourselves. Too many Christians like to stand back and point. Too few come along and say, well, let me help you. Let me walk alongside you. Let me comfort you. What do you need? I think bare minimum, that's our message, like an applicable message in the book of Obadiah. Any other comments, questions, queries, concerns, conundrums, considerations, confusions? Another one. All right. Does anything seem different or anything surprise you in the book of Obadiah? Catch you off guard? Yep. It is one of the, I believe, 3 books of the minor prophets that is not written at all to God's people, but the sole recipients are not God's people, enemies of God's people. We're going to study the second book, and starting in just a few minutes, which also has some interesting things. So I had an email. I do want to point out, I had an email sent to me this week asking if we could return to having Sunday school in the friendship room because it's cozier. We moved into the sanctuary for 2 reasons. Number one, during the time of the pandemic, a concern for social distancing, which the sanctuary provides amply for a Sunday school class. But also because with the pandemic, we moved to having Sunday school online for those who wanted to be online. There's no way, it's not that there's no way, but participation is much more difficult for a person online. Very unlikely that someone's going to notice if they type a question in, right? Or if they sent a text message or, something like that. But it still allows for some participation. And I was kind of wondering, is it actually worth it to do? And it's easy enough to do that if we had one person who was watching, I would say, yes, it is. Our lesson 2 or 3 weeks ago so far has 39 views, which that's not a lot in the scope of YouTube. It's a lot in our church. And I know that there are folks that do not attend here at all, some for health reasons, some for distance reasons, that watch. But it also seems like there might be others, and I have no way. I don't know how to track the logistics of that or reach out to those folks. But I thought that was pretty interesting. So I want to maintain having the video. However, I think I would like for us to think about how we can move it into the friendship room so that it can be more intimate and provide a better means for folks to be able to participate. I think if we're able to look at each other more, that is easier. If we're not quite so far apart, that is easier. If, with the sanctuary, I think probably 25% of the time I'm saying, huh, what, to a person who speaks, because I don't catch it the first time. Or if there are two people speaking, for whatever reason. In the friendship room, I think there'd be fewer occasions for that, and maybe would give people more reason to speak, and still some room to spread out if they want to sit at the table or at the cheap seats, comfy seats in the back. But I think it's going to require. I don't think it'll require a second computer, but it will require another camera that either works remotely if they make, I'm assuming they make those, or a very long cord to go to the computer, or actually more importantly, to the sound system. So that, as I would still need to use the microphone, would still need to go through the sound system to go into the computer. So I'd like you folks to brainstorm about that, to think about it, to pray about it. And if that's something you think is good, then let's just pray that God provides the means and the ingenuity to make that happen. If in praying about it, you don't think it's right, let me know. And it's something that we can talk about. Okay, Sandy? So Sandy's question is there a way to do it via Jitsi? There might be. I don't know. And I do like having, for folks, a single place to go to for access, that they can go right to our YouTube channel to check it out. And I don't know what hoops you have to jump through to get a conferencing platform to become a YouTube video. It doesn't mean it's not possible. It's just, I don't know. So you're asking if it's possible. I don't know. And then jump it over. Right. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. There probably is. We know from our hybrid, our Wednesday night, that the Jitsi makes it tough, because it's very easy, and I always feel so guilty. You turn for a second to talk to you're sitting in the friendship room. You turn for a moment to talk and answer a question from a person that's in the friendship room. And before you know it, it's been 5 minutes since you've looked at poor Janice on the video screen, or whatever. And there's never an intention to exclude her, but it's just it's a tricky thing to keep track of. And I don't know. I think that's a great question, Sandy, and it's something that we can pursue. And it's probably something that will take some time to morph and to figure out, but it's something I wanted to put on our radar, and I just insufficient just to put it in my brain. So I wanted to throw that out there for you guys. So be praying about that, please. And let's go take a peek at Jonah. Did everybody grab their Jonah papers? I had them out there on the table. So I have two introductory paragraphs to help you get to sleep tonight, and I will read them to you now. Jonah is a short book. It is only 48 verses. We primarily think about the great fish, mentioned only in 2 verses, though it is the setting of chapter 2. Yet we seem to miss the very timely message of Jonah, which we'll discuss later. Jonah prophesied in Israel, the northern kingdom, during the reign of Jeroboam II. So Jeroboam's reign is from 793 to 753 BC. So he's 40 years as king. But we're not quite sure where in there necessarily Jonah fits. The book of Jonah is interesting in that it contains almost no quote unquote prophetic text. It is written entirely in the third person, and it is not written to or about the people of Israel. So that's something that we just talked about a minute ago. Nineveh, who is the target of the book of Jonah, is one of the capitals of Assyria. So the Assyrian capitals moved around a little bit. Its name may mean place of fish. They were known for their worship of Ishtar and Dagon. Dagon was a fish-headed god. They were corrupt and violent. And as a matter of fact, I looked for the sources, I couldn't find them, but I remember reading that one of the things that they would do when they conquered a city, so in the ancient world, if a conquering army came and they had to set up a siege against you, and you did not surrender in a timely manner, then there would be all kinds of violence carried out upon you. And that really continued right up on through the medieval period. If you surrendered, it would be a reasonably peaceful takeover with a payoff, and you would remain in power. Like your king would usually remain in power. His family would remain in power, but they would now be subservient to the kingdom that attacked them. If Nineveh defeated you, the stories that I heard, and again, I couldn't find the source material, I remember it from either college or seminary, they would take large hooks and they would put them under your rib cage in such a way that you still survived. And then they would drag you back and forth across, in sight of you, in view of your people of your city, back and forth in celebration until you died. And then you probably just keep on going for a while after that. Just humiliating, painful, disgusting. And that was for them how they lorded their victory over you. Rough crowd. Nineveh was a city of violence, known for its brutal treatment of those it conquered. The Assyrians were notorious for amputating hands and feet, gouging eyes, and skinning and impaling their captives. Bad dudes. Janice. Oh, wow. Okay. So Janice has also heard about the hooks, and what she heard was that they would put them through the cheek of the person that they were taking away, like catching a fish. So interestingly, most people who practiced fishing in the ancient world, like if you're fishing for profit, to catch a lot of fish, you use nets. People that went after big fish would use hooks, just like we use today. And I think they used hooks. They worshipped a god that had a fish for a head. Their city is the city name Nineveh most likely means place of fish. What is the instrument that God uses to kick Jonah into shape? We don't even need to read the text. A big fish. Yeah. God is famous, right? You read, remember that when I went over the plagues in Egypt, right? God is famous, right? God was walking through saying, I'm more powerful than him, and I'm more powerful than her, and I'm more powerful than him. And right on through the list of deities, not all of them, there were too many, but it's the major ones, right? And then to Pharaoh, who says he's a god, who thinks he's a god, who's worshipped as a god, and I'm more powerful than you. So it makes total sense that for Jonah to get barfed up on dry land, having been in a fish's belly for 3 days, looking and smelling like the contents of a fish's belly, a fish that God commands, wouldn't a big fish be like the personal servant of your fish-headed God? But it turns out he actually works for mine. Right? that sense of ultimate victory, that's God's MO. God does it all the time. So we are actually just like we did with Obadiah. We're going to read all of Jonah. It's a short book, 48 verses. The way that things work and carry through are really important. But the first place we're going to go to is 2 Kings chapter 14, verses 23 through 27. Second Kings 14, 23 through 27. Ready? All right, here we go. In the 15th year of Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign in Samaria. And he reigned 41 years, and he did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not depart from all the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he had made Israel to sin. He restored the border of Israel from Lebo Hamath as far as the sea of the Arabah, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, which he spoke by his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet, who was from Gath Hepher. For the Lord saw that the affliction of Israel was very bitter, for there was none left bond or free, and there was none to help Israel. But the Lord had not said that he would blot out the name of Israel from under heaven, so he saved them by the hand of Jeroboam, son of Joash. Jonah chapter 1, verse 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, what do we learn between these two passages? Jonah's the son of Amittai, right? There are only a couple of prophets that have their own book that are also mentioned in another book. It doesn't happen very often. It's pretty cool. We saw it in Ezekiel with Daniel, and they were contemporaries of one another. And then we see it here, and you also see it with Isaiah during the time of Hezekiah, that Isaiah gets mentioned. So this is really cool to see that Jonah, son of Amittai, he's named as a prophet in 2 Kings under one of the wicked kings of the northern kingdom. They were all wicked kings. And then to have him named here, exact same name. It's the same guy. And what's cool is, without any other detail, that takes the book of Jonah and it gives us a place in history, which is pretty neat. All right, let's look at verse 1, chapter 1, verse 2. Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come before me. So, what is God's command to Jonah? Yeah, to go to Nineveh, leave Israel, leave your home, leave where you live, leave the people that you've assumed that I've called you to all this time, and go to Nineveh and declare about their evil before them, my judgment upon them. Right. All right, so chapter 1, verse 3. But Jonah, always bad when God says to do something and the next word is a but. Okay? But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. So what does Jonah do? He tries to run away from God. There are some who believe that the book of Jonah is not written by Jonah. It's possible. Number one, Jonah is always the whole book is pretty much in the third person. Chapter 2 is a prayer, so it makes sense that it's not. It could be that it's written by Jonah, could be that it's not. I'm not super duper worried about it. But this is a very, do you see this interesting thing that the author does in verse 3? Where does God call him to? Where does God call Jonah to go? Nineveh. Where does he go, or where does he try to go to? Yeah, and what's interesting about that? Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. He still has to take a boat, which is funny. If you're trying to avoid Fishtown, go inland. Okay. Right. Away from the presence of the Lord with that kind of ancient world mentality that gods are the gods of nations, right? Opposite direction. Tarshish, Tarshish, last time I checked, I think Tarshish is assumed to be Spain, a city in Spain. That's the opposite direction, right? Yeah. What word did I emphasize? How many times? Felt like it. Man, 3 times. What's significant about 3? No, no, 7's complete. Important. What? Peter denied Christ 3 times, right? What's important about 3? How many witnesses does it take to commit a person for a crime or convict a person for a crime? 2 or 3 witnesses, right? So whenever you see something written 3 times, it is a pretty good sign that that God has convicted that person of a crime, right? It doesn't say, that the text could have very easily said, so he rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So in order to get there, he found a ship heading there from Joppa and paid the fare to get out there, right? That he could have used pronouns like we would use, but he doesn't. He uses that word 3 times to drive home that guilt that Jonah is doing the wrong thing. He's trying to flee from the presence of the Lord, which is impossible, but he thinks he's doing it, and he's going to do it by going all the way to Tarshish as far as he can get. It's on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, as opposed to getting over to Nineveh up in the Mesopotamian area. We have like 3 more minutes. Yes. No kidding. So NIV doesn't say it 3 times? Says it 2? Okay, so see, there's the NIV. NIV often makes that decision, right? The NIV likes to go for, if the NIV is going to lean towards accuracy or readability, the NIV leans towards readability, right? So whereas like I'm using ESV is happy to be redundant and stilted, so that the accuracy can get there. It's still it's more readable than some translations, but. So I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of that, but thank you for bringing that up to me, Sandy. But still had it there twice, right? 2 or 3 witnesses, 2 or 3. 3 is definite. You're doomed if you have 3. 2 is good. So I think we'll stop right there today with Jonah getting ready to go pay for the boat to get out to Tarshish, and we will pick up at the bottom of that page next week. I'm excited. Man, I tell you, I had every single one of these minor prophets, as I've been working through this series on hearing God, every single one of them has been so interesting for me. I've never spent this much time in the minor prophets. Honestly, I can say the same thing of the major prophets, that even though we kind of we grabbed just little bits, I'd never spent quite so much time poring over the text as I had during that period. And man, it has been so interesting to really dig in and to see how where and how God speaks differently, how God speaks similarly, where the overlap is, and then to also sort of beginning to get a sense of the personality of these prophets. And Jonah is a neat book because you see much more of his personality than you do in most of the other prophets. But it is and so for that reason, that's less shocking. But it was neat for me to be working through it this week, to pull this together and to see like God's consistency, to see some stuff that we often miss, right? Because, like I said in the introduction, when we think about Jonah, we think about the fish. The fish is only mentioned twice, right? Sort of like ending this chapter when Jonah's in the fish, but you don't really get much about the fish while Jonah's in the fish. So I'm going to close us in a word of prayer. Father, thank you very much for today. Thank you for the opportunity to be in your presence. And Lord, thank you that you are a God who speaks to his people. We ask, Lord, that you'd keep your hands upon us, that you would bless us and guide us today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.